Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I have a lot of people to thank. Obviously Rebecca, and it's been really great getting to know Raisa and UC through these different conferences. I also have these two women to thank. The two novels that this project draws from, the two protagonists, Gertie Neville's from The Dollmaker, which was written in 1954. So weird. In which Gertie starts the story as a farmer. She's a sharecropper with dreams of owning her own farm one day, who's kind of forced to migrate north to Detroit when her husband kind of gets a job, part of the Great Migration that happened when people fleeing the farm around World War II because all these factories were popping up and offering this, kind of basically seducing people through capitalism. Okay, so Hannah Coulter is Wendell Berry's creation, and she is also living in World War II, also in Kentucky, but stays on the farm and is part of what Berry calls like a membership-based community. And so I basically envision through the project, which you'll see, these two women creating a relationship with each other through letter writing. And through this process, see them both as EcoJustice educators. That's kind of like where I started, because both of these novels were educated me around the tenets of EcoJustice and made me feel them and experience them and really like get them in a deeper way than I had previously through reading some of like the other texts. So I think that these two women, both the two novels separately and then through their conversation together, create, kind of engage really in this cultural ecological analysis, where they're really kind of seeing and sometimes not seeing but participating because we're shaped by it, these kinds of patterns, in discursive patterns that reflect value hierarchies in this culture and clearly aren't okay with it. And so that's kind of like where we start. And so some that come up in the novels, and then what I try and bring through the letters: sexism, rationalism, mechanism, consumerism, anthropocentrism, just to name a few. And then I think that through my thought with bringing them together in conversation is that they together can kind of create a pedagogy of responsibility. Which I know we heard a lot about kind of what the tenets of eco-justice are earlier. But this idea of a pedagogy of responsibility, they quote it in Rebecca's text and Jeff Edmondson and John Bonacci, as kind of confronting the tension between two ethical questions of what we need to conserve and what we need to transform. And so they experience that. They're living this tension, and so kind of teach us through kind of their discernment, what those are, what the things that need to be transformed, what the healing relationships do look like, versus like what's wrong with this, kind of modern culture. And then like methodologically use arts-based research, which I know we've all talked about a lot these last couple days, but basically kind of looking at kind of the process of doing the research and then the product as deeply enmeshed and as one, and as embodied and emotional, as well as intellectual and conceptual. So just kind of blending that all together. And then just thinking of like the transformative of fiction as like a transformative pedagogy. So the fact that it can it's more of an intimate, emotional, imaginative experience than reading like a primary text or an analytic text. And both kind of through those novels, but then I hope taking it to a deeper level and imagining them in conversation with each other, getting to know these two characters better as they speak to each other. And then just a couple notes on becoming, and belonging. In order to do this project, I really had to be in relationship with these two women. I was awkward in the beginning, trying to get to know them, trying to feel like, who am I to like think that I can be at one with them enough to communicate what I think they would say, and so really just trying to like get to know them. And then I grieved at the end. I was really actually kind of sad when I was done writing this because I knew I would miss them. And then now I get to present, and like it's kind of like seeing old friends in a way. And so through this like relationship, the process for me like was the learning. Like I learned through the process of doing this project. And then just this idea of becoming, I thought about that a lot when we were in our retreat, and this idea of that tapestry that Derek was talking about yesterday, and how I really do see these women as interwoven in my own tapestry, and as kind of creating a membership with each other, but that I'm also a part of. So really showing me what membership looks like, and allowing them to become my mothers and my friends and my teachers. And the idea of belonging, the fact that this really deals with something that's like near and dear to my heart, which is like the industrialization and corresponding devastation in Detroit. Detroit's a place that I belong to, and that's why like these books really sat with me so heavily, is just kind of showing me how complex belonging is, that there's brokenness in it, but then that there's love through that brokenness, and that I think that's what's important to note, just because we talked about Detroit earlier today, is that this is a time in World War II where the narrative around Detroit at that time was success, was that it's booming. And so the narrative I grew up with was that we need to go back to that, back where, we had these kind of like corporate overlords, which is kind of like what the narrative now is reflecting, that same idea, that in order for Detroit to be successful within the dominant culture's framework, it needs to be kind of run by corporate saviors. So Henry Ford, now it's Dan Gilbert. It's kind of the same story. And so, yeah, that's kind of the framework. So I'm going to read you some of the letters. They're shortened excerpts, so I'm sorry if they're confusing or kind of disjointed. The best I can do with the time. So we'll start with a letter from Hanna. And that's Wendell Berry and his dog. Dear Gertie, your letter has found me at a time of great sadness and grief, but it is a reminder that only kindness can save us from our suffering and carry us through the darkness, so we may once again remember the light. Although you and Mr. Hatcher only met once, I know it was the love you showed while trying to save your son that inspired him to enter that space with you and help bring Amos back. That space could seem small, as you only occupied it with him for a short time. But sometimes, too, I could see that love is a great room with a lot of doors, where we are invited to knock and come in. Though it contains all the world, the sun, moon, and stars, it is so small as to also be in our hearts. It is in the hearts of those who choose to come in. Your bravery and determination invited Mr. Hatcher and now me into the room you share with your children, and I know that he will remain there, even though he never received your written thanks. Your story has helped me in so many ways, and I'm filled with gratitude. I wish I could offer you the same, but I'm afraid tears come easier than words these days. These tears, though they come from the loss of my Virgil, are not only mine to bear, as I imagine is always the case with war. They belong to Port William, to the Feltners, to the Hatchers, and to families across the country or world, overcome with new fears and an overwhelming grief. Dear Hanna, your mother sent me your letter up here in Detroit. She always told me a body's got to give in to reason, and I suppose now my body is like all the others, following their men to the factories. I'm ever so sorry that Mr. Hatcher and Mr. Feltner was killed in action. I liked what you was writing about love and how you got to enter into it and stay like a room. But for me, love's not like a room with its four walls, but like a forest, how you can get lost there, surrounded by God's creatures. But it's when you're lost that you learn to know and to love and to care for them. Getting lost in Detroit ain't like that one bit. Here, there's no kindness in being lost, no trees to love or fields to work, and I haven't really found many smiling faces. I'm afraid every time I send my kids off to school that they's going to get hit and killed, since everything's on wheels, and wheels don't care about the youngins. Everyone keeps saying that people make big money up here and it's work in the fields that'll kill you, but I think it's the opposite. Dear Gertie, the loss of comfort and hope from leaving the land you care for is significant, But I'm so glad you wrote to me, because sharing our grief bonds us both and brings us together out of the darkness. For there is always some shame and fear in this, I think. Shame for the terrible selfishness and loneliness of grief, and fear of the difference between your grief and anybody else's. But this is a kind of courtesy, too, and a kind of honesty, an unwillingness to act as if loss and grief and suffering are extraordinary. Your passion, love, and gratitude inspired me to write you and keep thoughts of you in my life. My sincere hope for you is that as you continue your journey, you find relationships in those new faces, solace in continuing to do what makes you feel alive, and joy in loving yourself as you continue to selflessly love your family. Please know that I'm with you and hope we can find our way back to the doors of love's great room. We may be lost in our pain now, but we can't quit living, because the light that shines in the darkness and never goes out calls us on into life. It calls us back again into the great room. It calls us into our bodies and into the world, into whatever the world will require. It calls us into work and pleasure, goodness and beauty, and the company of other loved ones. Dear Hannah, I never heard the word adjust before coming up to Detroit, but I guess it's what they make you do in the schools and factories, which are one and the same if you ask me. With only one tree in the yard, surrounded by the big fences, and so crowded with people they move like a current through a river. These teachers tell me, they will adjust. This school has many children from many places, but in the end, they all adjust, and so will yours. But what if I don't want them to adjust? Sounds kind of foolish to me to be teaching these youngins to not be who they are or love where they're from, and to be judging them on how good they are at being like everyone else. I don't want them to be like the millions of faces in Detroit, unable to learn because it's too cold, unable to play because all the fields has been turned into roads for the cars or factories for the killing machines, and most importantly, unable to be kind because everyone's scared of everyone else. Dear Gertie, what good is adjusting without attaching? And how can you attach to a place that is in such constant movement and that uses you more than it cares for you? It seems like living in a place where everyone is trying to make it so they can move up doesn't make for the caring way you're meant to live. Detroit doesn't seem like a place that supports all life and sounds much different than here, where members of Port William aren't trying to get someplace, they think they are someplace. Dear Hannah, I'm glad I have you to write to, since Clovis doesn't like it when I complain about Detroit. It's like his promised land, even though it ain't holy seeming at all, and what goes on in them factories seems more like sinning than praying. Speaking of sinning, the people in Detroit get downright mean when it comes to religion, and it seems that the Catholics use other religions as a reason to be cruel to people. Like Miss Daly, one of the other project women, shouting at me, saying I'm a hillbilly and should go home because I'm a communist. It's like it's not enough that we just got through a world war. People got to start their own little wars all over the city on account of someone's religion or how their youngins act or how much money they got or where someone's home is. The other neighbor ladies is nice, though, but it feels like the words I say to these women have no life. They're forgotten about once someone moves along. Not like talk to Sue Annie back home. There, the words always living, remembered, could be repeated 20 years later. I hope our words are more like those, real and lasting. Dear Gertie, I too hope the words we're sharing hold significance and will continue to bear witness to our changing lives and world. I especially enjoyed the thought that our letters have created a living relationship based on care for one another, no matter how far apart we are. This sense of commitment as we continue to share our lives in these letters is like forming our own space, one that is safe from loneliness. You are a part of my story and I yours. Dear Hannah, I like thinking of these letters as a place where we both can belong, since I haven't had that feeling since leaving my own place, and I miss it. The feeling of loving and caring for the land and the people, not just because of what we get out of them, but because of what we mean to each other. Hannah, you'd think that working in them factories is like fighting in the war, because when Clovis comes home at night, it's like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Whatever meanness goes on with the men all day comes home with him, so it gets fired up against me. But he had never used to be like that back home, even when a broken down truck or flat tire made him past midnight coming in. I know he ain't happy being just a number, but it seems the more anger that grows inside him, the more he blames me and wants me to make Detroit better for him, even though it's him that makes us live like this. He goes on and on saying things like, all our life together, I've wanted to make more money so we could live better, so you and the kids could have it kind of nice. I bet now I'm making more money than any man back home. Like I'm a no-good wife because I don't like spending his money to show that he's made it. But it's just Detroit that makes it seem like I don't know what I'm doing. Not like back home, where I didn't have to buy everything, where we had an oven I knew how to use, and most of the feeding and fending for the family came from me growing and selling our food. But here it all comes from Clovis, even the kindling. Dear Gertie, I'm sad to read that Clovis has become so immersed in the business of living in Detroit, where his life is being measured by machines that have no feelings, powerful men who don't know him, and money that disappears into convenience faster than it comes. I'm even more sorry that he's not happy with this way of life, but has seemed to give in to the idea that it's what he needs to be doing. I fear that this notion of making it will have a negative impact on more lives than Clovis's and more places in Detroit. Mostly I'm sad to hear about how Clovis makes you doubt your love and resourcefulness. Dear Hanna, things sound awfully busy down there, but like that perfect kind of busy. Where your hard work is made easy because it's meeting the needs of the people in the place that you love. My kind of busy is filled with people, but is lonely, and the work just meets the needs of the union or the teachers. For example, the making supper time used to be the best part of my day back home, when I had the satisfaction of most of it being below me. Now, it's my most dreaded part because of all the chaos surrounding me, with the going home traffic at its heaviest, so that it comes through the street in a long, roaring growl, drowned at times by the scream of an airplane or a louder blast from the steel mill. The sounds, as they often do, make me think of some many-voiced beast out there, hungry, waiting for us all. I feel like I've disappeared, going about the daily business of buying food, ironing clothes, making lunches, cleaning dishes, and handing my family over to that growling, hungry beast outside our thin, crumbling walls every morning. If I'm just a body doing these things like everyone else, then maybe I am just like them. Maybe this is adjusting, and I'm just another rock at the bottom of a mighty river that didn't ask to be made smooth and all alike. Dear Gertie, I know that there is no beast, despite how hungry, that is powerful enough to destroy the love you have for your family or defeat the hope you have that you will one day return home. Our letters have come from Love's great room and have deeply moved me, healed me, and prepared me to accept the role in the membership of my life. Unless I hope you know you are a member too. Of course, Burley Coulter, Nathan's uncle, would agree, as he likes to emphasize that we are all members of one another, and that membership is much greater than time or place could ever measure. I know that most people are searching for a better place these days, but this does not seem like the right path. For it is by the place we've got and our love for it and our keeping of it that this world is joined to heaven. When you feel weak, alone, or hopeless, I want you to remember that you are a part of a membership that is the only thing strong enough to challenge the powers that are threatening the relationships you strive for. Clovis has chosen a path towards what he thinks is a better place, where he can be disconnected and free, unbothered by membership, but where he will be left forgotten and alone when the machines decide he is no longer useful. As a member, however, your memories will always have a place, as you join a community of creatures, living, dead, and yet to come, and all your thoughts will always be near to laughter and to tears. And I just want to mention, too, there's a lot in there that's from Harriet Arno and Wendell Berry. I just didn't want to do, like, quote, unquote, so I can send it if anyone wants to know what I wrote or what they wrote. That's it.